Welcome to Lesson 9 in Biblical Basics of Political Theology. We're going to be summarizing, and really not summarizing, but synthesizing lessons 6, 7, and 8. Now, this is the mechanics of corrupted and corrupting spheres. We're digging down to how does this actually work. In one sense, you want to think about this kind of like you're a chess piece on a chess board, and the game we're playing is kind of like chess. You move according to the rules because of your recognition of the objective truth that Christ is both the designer of the game and the one who set the rules. And so for the glory of Christ, you play by the rules. But you're noticing that there are some chess pieces, the majority of them, that don't seem to move rightly. Some of them objectively are wrong, and others you're not certain. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to go back and figure out why exactly are they moving this way? How are they supposed to be moving? And that's what we're seeking to draw out. So if we start to tie together what we've learned, we know that there are pre-fall spheres of self and family. And each of those spheres has its obligations before God, which result in their rights. Now, these spheres continue post-fall. So now they're post-fall spheres. They still have the same obligations before God and the resultant rights. But now, post-fall, there's actually two lines of humanity, right? There's the redeemed line, and there is the unredeemed line. The Apostle John would call them the sons of God and the sons of the devil. And so now we have two lines that are filling and subduing the earth to the glory of their respected fathers. And the redeemed are always a small minority. And so the majority of what we see is corrupted spheres of self, creating larger corrupted spheres, and then corrupting those spheres further, and then using those spheres to corrupt the other spheres. That is the chess game. And so we see the seed of Satan will go about abusing their power, using it in ways that they're not authorized to do. And so the pre-fall institutions or the pre-fall spheres are now corrupted because of the fall. And so the sphere of self and the sphere of family corrupted, and the sphere of self is corrupted, but the sphere of family is corrupted because it's made up of corrupted spheres of self who further corrupt the sphere of family, right? So they're both corrupt and they are corrupting. And so that hints at the need for a retributive sphere, but we're not there yet, even though we've touched on it a little bit. We've said that with spheres, you generally have three things. There's a divine definition, there's a divine structure, and then there's a divine direction or purpose or telos. This is easiest with the family, right? So our definition, a man and a woman, plus a lot of times it'll include kids. And that's our core definition. The structure is that the husband is the head of the wife, and then they are jointly over the kids together. And then the direction, right, is to fill the mandate, or fulfill the mandate, right? They're going to fill the earth with people and God-glorifying culture. And so there's an intentionality there. There's a situational awareness of what we're supposed to be doing. And so those are kind of the three marks of any sphere, a divine definition, a structure, and a direction. Now, the sphere of self in the line of Cain that's corrupted, think of the way it contrasts with the truth, right? The divine direction. Their direction's corrupted, right? It no longer serves God, the sphere of self. They now serve self, and they're actually engaged in the suppression of the truth about God. You think about their divine definition. They've rejected that. They're not made in the image of God. Now, what we're seeing with the proliferation of kind of the trans and gay stuff, that's a redefinition of what it means to be a person. And it ties into evolution, which is a redefinition. So now it's how do I identify, right? So we get into identity politics. And now I'm defined by my feelings, not biology or the word of God. So it's the psychologized self. And so that then has to do with structure, right? We've got a wrong definition. We've got a wrong structure, because the structure is now that, you know what, my feelings are what controls everything else, right? So it's a corrupted order of operations. My feelings are exalted to an improper place, the place of objective reality, which is not true. Our feelings aren't what determine reality. So you've got this defective, corrupted definition, structure, and even definition. So the world is filled with these Romans 1 people carrying out the mandate. And so this corrupted sphere of self has a corrupted direction, right? Their telos. They're a corrupted definition and a corrupted structure. And they bring this corruption into any sphere that they enter into, and they corrupt those same three things in any sphere they go to. So just again, think of the family. We know that in terms of direction, right? We know the direction of the family. It is to essentially to fill the earth with God glorifying culture and people, right? That's the purpose of the family. But they reject that definition, right? Their telos, their direction, there's no reference to God. There's no reference to any of the mandates, and there's no reference to filling the earth. And often, actually, what's going on now is the opposite. Don't fill the earth. You think about the definition. They corrupted the definition. Now it can be two men, or it can be two women, or it can be more than two men or two women. You think about the structure. Now it can be, and this even ties also to a definition, but now it can be two men and two surrogate kids, right? And we saw this particularly in the last few years, where you have these homosexuals having surrogate kids. So these corrupted spheres of self have now created corrupted spheres of family. With that, we can talk about the sphere of education. So biblically, we know that the direction or the purpose, the telos of education is really, it's the fulfilling of the mandate, right? The creation, kingdom, cultural dominion mandate to the glory of God. And so parents have the obligation to teach their children two types of truths, right? Spiritual truths and general truths. Spiritual truths, what is man and who is God, right? Those tie into each other. Who is God? Who is man? Why are we here? And then now that we've observed here, here's what we've learned about here, this general truths, creational truths, and here's how you can thrive in carrying out the mandate. That is our direction or our purpose for education. That's proper. But they take it and they distort it, because think about it. They don't have a biblical mandate. They actually want to teach a different anthropology. So while we're teaching primarily who is God and who is man and everything flowing from there, they're teaching an alternative, false view of who is man and who is God. They're teaching the opposite. They're creating an entirely false worldview. And so their direction or their purpose is anti-God. It's an anti-education, really. Then you think about structure. We think about education. We get our direction or purpose right, or at least most of the times we do when we're thinking biblically about education. But then when we think about the structure, it's a parental institution. The Bible is crystal clear that it is the role of the parents to educate the children. But when corrupted spheres of self create a corrupted sphere of education, they totally invert that. They want to remove parental authority. That's what we're seeing here most recently, right? You can't opt out of certain educational topics. And there's going to be things we even hide from you. And so it's a complete inversion. They're corrupting the direction and the purpose. They're directing the structure. They're destroying the parental authority. And then here's what happens. So these corrupted spheres of self have created a corrupted sphere of education, and now they're going to try to corrupt the sphere of family. They're going to interfere with the family structure, right? They're going to attempt to force parents to follow the ideological whims that have been planted in impressionable and indoctrinated children. So now you have this education sphere made up of corrupted individuals. They created this corrupted sphere, and now that corrupted sphere is attempting to corrupt other spheres, both family and state. So follow the logic here, because man, particularly corrupted man, is always using his power in ways that he's not authorized to do. This is what they do in the education sphere. They're going to attempt to utilize the retributive power of the state, the coercive sword, to accomplish their task. They're seeking to wield power that doesn't belong to them. And so they're tempting the retributive state, the coercive state, to misuse its power by enforcing a corrupted educational sphere. How do they do that? Well, by redefining this family sphere with the threat of force, right? So the state now threatens to take away your children if you don't bow to the ideology of the education sphere. So the education sphere is now being used to redefine the family, and they're going to bring in the state to do that, this retributive sword coercive power. And so this is where sphere sovereignty comes in. It is the recognition, sphere sovereignty is the recognition that spheres have autonomy under God, and it cannot be overturned or micromanaged by a different sphere, even the sphere of the retributive state, which is a post-fall institution, right? The post-fall institution of the retributive state is not authorized to redefine pre-fall institutions. And so that's why it's so important to establish as best as possible. This is not going to be perfect or exhaustive, but as best as possible, we need to establish the boundaries of the individual spheres. You see, as we establish the individual boundaries by looking at the rights and the obligations of each sphere, those rights and obligations, which then create boundaries, mark out the boundaries that cannot be transgressed by other spheres. And so as you mark off the boundary of one sphere, it sets the boundary of the other spheres. So here's what's going on. The corrupted sphere of man enters into other spheres and then creates another corrupted sphere. It's corrupt in its definition, it's corrupt in its structure, and it's corrupt in its direction. And then it will use whatever power it can to expand its authority, and thereby justifying its use of power to enforce its definition and direction, right? So there's a new definition, a new direction, and it wants to enforce that. And it restructures the corrupted sphere away from what God intended. And then it will use that sphere to corrupt the other spheres, and it will use the coercive power of the state to corrupt the other spheres. And then here's where it gets really bad, right? The sphere of the state is not given power to tear down the boundaries between the spheres, which is what happens when the state comes in and destroys parental authority. So here's the deal. When the sons of the devil, all right, the corrupted spheres, when they control the state sphere, they likewise corrupt all the identifying marks or the three markers of a sphere, right? We know the definition of what the state is. The state, by definition, is God's servant, right? It is subservient to God. It serves his purposes. Romans 13 tells us he is a God's servant to you for good. And the you as Christians, they're to do our good or serve for our good. And they're an avenger of evil, but they reject that definition, right? The sons of the devil, they don't acknowledge the fact that they are the servants of God to carry out his purposes. Now, as to the structure, God's given them a little bit of latitude, but as for direction or purpose, that's tied to definition. They reject that definition, and therefore they reject that direction. And since they don't recognize God, they will use their coercive power in ways they're not authorized to use them, right? That's what all mankind does. They will use their coercive power in ways they're not authorized to use it to accomplish tasks that they're not authorized to accomplish, right? Like tearing up the boundaries between different spheres, like that of family and education. And so what they do then, they use this corruption of power, and they attempt to accomplish things they're not authorized to accomplish. They aid in the redefining of the sphere of the family, and they let the educational sphere tyrannize the sphere of the family. And then here's what they do. The education sphere, corrupt as it is, seeks to wield the power of the state for its own distorted purposes, right? So the corrupted state responds to the corrupt education sphere in like kind. Now what's going to happen is the corrupted state sphere uses the corrupted education sphere to perpetuate belief in the propriety of the state's corrupted own definition, right? They've redefined their definition, they've redefined their purpose. Now they're going to coercively use the education system to cause everybody else to think that's right. And now the state is corrupting the educational sphere, and the educational sphere is corrupting the sphere of self. And so this is why we've got to understand sphere sovereignty. This is why we looked at Romans 13, because we see the dangers. We've just covered the dangers and the threat that the retributive state is, but we want to go, we want to be careful not to go too far, right? The retributive state does have obligations under God, and therefore it does have rights, right? It has the obligation to legislate, to investigate, and to punish, and to tax for those purposes. And so, again, what we need to do is return to establishing the spheres or the boundaries of those spheres. And we do that by looking at the rights and the obligations that each sphere has. Because as we establish the rights and the obligations of the individual sphere, of the family sphere, then that sets the boundaries for the other spheres. So hopefully that synthesis makes sense. I know that was a lot of information, but it was time to tie it all together. I hope that was helpful.